After Yeshwantrao Holkar's victory at the Battle of Hadapsar, the Peshwa Bajirao too, fearing for his life, fled to Singar fort and then sought British protection. Governor General Wellesley then swiftly seized this chance to extend British influence. He ferried or rescued Peshwa to Vasai, Bassein, popularly called a Bassein in history, where he signed the Treaty of Bassein on 31st December 1802, effectively making the Maratha state a British vassal. Yeshwantrao Holkar had hoped that the Peshwa might reconcile their differences and avoid British intervention, so he even sent food and offers of peace. Yet Bajirao too, the Peshwa, preferred British support, believing perhaps that Holkar is now seeking revenge as he had killed his brother. So, meanwhile, Daulatrao Scindia, whose territory Holkar had ravaged, also distrusted Holkar, fearing Yeshwantrao Holkar would emerge too powerful if the Peshwa sided with him. Now, with the Peshwa in their camp, that is the British camp, the British focused on preventing a united Maratha resistance. They wooed other chieftains and sowed mistrust amongst them, ensuring none formed a stable alliance. So, when Peshwa Bajirao II was brought to Pune with the support of British troops and again seated, Yeshwantrao Holkar withdrew from Pune to avoid any direct confrontation with the British. The confusion and distrust amongst Bajirao II, Yeshwantrao Holkar, Scindia and Bhosle allowed the British to capitalize on their divisions. Yeshwantrao Holkar felt that if he supports Scindia and Bhosle now in their war against British, and if they win against British, they will emerge stronger and may not recognize him as the successor of Holkar. So, Yeshwantrao Holkar preferred to stand alone and withdrew from Pune and came back to Maheshwar. Thereafter, Daulatrao Scindia, together with Bhosle of Nagpur, finally fought the British but were quickly subdued, losing their strategic fortresses like Ahmednagar and Asirgarh. By the end of 1803, both Scindia and Bhosle signed treaties surrendering their territory and sovereignty to British, and also on top of that paid penalty. So, if now one views the whole thing dispassionately, while Yeshwantrao Holkar had succeeded in avenging the wrongs that were done to his family and to him, and he was able to retain control of Holkar's domain, but his 6-month-long campaign at the same time weakened the Maratha Confederacy. Now, when Maratha Confederacy was subjugated and both Daulatrao Scindia and Bhosle had signed a peace agreement with the British, Governor General Wellesley and General Lake, the Chief of Army, British Army then, East India Company, underestimated Yeshwantrao Holkar I, and the British forces went back to their cantonment. However, Yeshwantrao Holkar I was now the only one left independent with a sizable force, a large cavalry, around 60,000 horses and almost 200 guns. So, what did Yeshwantrao Holkar do? He landed up with his cavalry near Jaipur and started exacting taxes from the villages of Raja of Jaipur. Now, he was a new British ally, and so he sought protection from Holkar's forces, ravaging his territory. The British realized that Yeshwantrao Holkar could disrupt this fragile peace. Now, as the report suggested and was circulated, that Yeshwantrao Holkar I was exacting large sums from Rajput estates and rallying other kings. Wellesley and Lake became increasingly anxious about his enterprising spirit and military character. They now considered supporting Yeshwantrao Holkar's rival, Kashirao Holkar, to diminish Yeshwantrao's legitimacy. But amid their own logistical challenges and alliances, the British hesitated to provoke him prematurely. Now, General Lake complained to Governor General Wellesley that it would be impossible to dictate terms to Yeshwantrao Holkar without resorting to force. He wrote, "I was never so plagued as I am with this devil. He just nay hardly keeps within the letter of the law, by which means our army is remaining in the field at an enormous expense." Now, Lord Wellesley, although already in trouble with the governors of the East India Company over the expenses of his aggressive territorial ambitions, decided nonetheless that a quick victorious campaign would be cheaper than paying for an army of observation. So the hostilities against Yeshwantrao Holkar one commenced in April 1804. Now once again, Yeshwantrao Holkar took the British on a merry-go-round trip like he did with Scindia's forces in 1802. The British marched from Kanpur to Jaipur, almost 500 kilometers, and thereafter to Bhanpura in hot sun, which is another 350 kilometers, chasing him. And thereafter, their forces ran for their lives, crossing two rivers, Chambal and River Banas, after having suffered huge casualties. And walking for almost more than 1,000 kilometers, they reached Agra huffing and puffing, totally disorganized and in a disabled state. And thereafter, Yeshwantrao Holkar made them march to Delhi, thereafter Shamli, back to Deegh, and then to Bharatpur. Marshman, in his book History of India, describing the disaster that Colonel Monson's brigade faced, Governor General Wellesley's military perception led him to urge General Lake to continue the pursuit with rapidity, even though there might be little hope of bringing Holkar to action. He remarked that if Yeshwantrao is pushed with vigor, the war will not last a fortnight. If not, God knows when it will be over. So, after having marched for hundreds of kilometers in hot sun, and General Lake could not bring Holkar into the battlefield, General Lake, instead of continuing the pursuit, broke up his force, withdrew his army into cantonments, and sent Colonel Monson with a brigade-sized force to follow the steps of Yeshwantrao Holkar. Colonel Monson with his brigade marched with this small force into Yeshwantrao Holkar's territory near Bhanpur, hoping to coordinate with Colonel Murray's troops from Gujarat. But when Colonel Murray withdrew without contacting or linking up with Colonel Monson found himself stranded without adequate supplies and reinforcements. So, Holkar's force ambushed Colonel Monson's detachment led by a lieutenant who was captured, and thereby seizing elephants, guns and supplies. Thereafter, Yeshwantrao Holkar decided to seize the initiative and relentlessly pursued Colonel Monson's force, who attempted to cross the Solan, Chambal and Banas rivers. It was raining heavily. The local rulers also, Raja of Kota, refused the Britishers any entry because they had already paid taxes to Holkar and they were scared of it. The British had to abandon their guns, wagons and baggage in the mud. Yeshwantrao Holkar on the river banks led a furious attack when Monson's troops tried crossing the Banas River. Though some British soldiers fought bravely, but many were drowned and were killed. Colonel Monson's demoralized army reached Agra in total disarray on 31st August 1804, a humiliating retreat dubbed as the most disgraceful act for the British since Colonel Bailey's defeat in 1780 by Hyder Ali and his son Tipu Sultan. This retreat has been called one of the greatest and most disgraceful setbacks to the military reputation in India. For further details, those who are interested to study Colonel Monson's retreat, जो उस समय हिंदुस्तान में बहुत बड़ा जोक बन गया था अंग्रेजों के खिलाफ, read my book, The Forgotten General Maharaja Yeshwantrao Holkar I. Now, emboldened by his success, Yeshwantrao Holkar now decided to advance towards the Mughal capital at Delhi, which was likely defended by a British colonel and it had a small garrison. For this purpose, Yeshwantrao Holkar sent a portion of his cavalry and infantry and artillery to capture the fort under his commander Harnath Singh, while he himself with his cavalry decided to delay General Lake's relief column which would advance towards Delhi through constant raids and tactical retreats. Meanwhile, his infantry and artillery, after having reached the city, that's Delhi, bombarded the fort. Now, despite being outnumbered, the garrison commander, a colonel, with his mixed force of irregulars and some British officers, repelled repeated assaults by Holkar's infantry, including a ladder attack on the fort. But they did not give up, and Harnath Singh failed to capture the fort. Meanwhile, General Lake's forces, which were marching towards Delhi from Mathura, they were continuously harassed by Yeshwantrao Holkar's cavalry. Lake, however, finally reached Delhi on 18th October. Now, Yeshwantrao Holkar, recognizing that he could not breach the fort before General Lake's arrival, he withdrew his artillery and infantry towards Deegh and once again chose a weaker British-held target, this time Shamli, which was a small garrison of British forces, rather than risking a pitched battle with them. Now, meanwhile, all this while, Mr. Yeshwantrao Holkar I had hardly suffered any losses, whereas the British had to move their forces all the way from Kanpur to Agra, then to Delhi and onwards. And they had suffered innumerable attacks en route. They were harassed at every place all along the march. Now, as General Lake arrived to defend Delhi in mid-October 1804, Yeshwantrao Holkar swiftly crossed the Yamuna river near Panipat and advanced to Shamli. There he laid siege to Colonel Burns' small detachment, hoping to cut off any reinforcement returning from Delhi to Sara. Now, General Lake, seeing that Holkar's rapid moves kept the British on the defensive, decided to split his army. One portion under General Fraser led his infantry to chase Holkar's infantry heading towards Deegh and Bharat. General Lake took a mobile column, 6 regiments of cavalry plus some mounted artillery and rushed to relieve Shamli. Now, Yeshwantrao Holkar's troops entered Shamli, firing on the besieged British unit. Almost 100 British Sipahis were killed in that. Now, as soon as General Lake's relief column approached, Yeshwantrao Holkar now moved to Thana, then Khatoli near Meerut and on to Farakkabad, systematically ravaging villages to deny supplies to the pursuing British. Now, British, forced to protect their newly won Doab territories, captured at great cost in earlier wars, the British were left with no choice but to keep following Holkar relentlessly. Whereas Yeshwantrao Holkar's strategy of evasion and rapid cavalry deployment allowed him to preserve his core forces and continue applying pressure on British-held areas. By late 1804, the British were still struggling to pin down Yeshwantrao Holkar in a decisive engagement, foreshadowing the extended campaign that would continue into 1805. Now, after the failed attempt to capture Delhi, thus did Harnath Singh, the commander of Yeshwantrao Holkar, to capture Delhi, but he failed. So, Yeshwantrao Holkar dispatched his infantry and artillery under Harnath Singh towards Deegh for safety. Now, Raja Ranjit Singh of Bharatpur, who had broken his recent treaty with the Britishers by giving refuge to Yeshwantrao Holkar's artillery and infantry and heavy baggage, now faced the war at his doorstep because Deegh was his. The Deegh fort belonged to Raja Ranjit Singh. Now, meanwhile, General Lake, as I told you, had split his forces. One column was under General Fraser, who was following Harnath Singh's infantry, and another column that travelled very light was under General Lake, who was following Yeshwantrao Holkar's mobile cavalry. Now, Harnath Singh, after having reached Deegh, deployed his forces. He had good amount of infantry and artillery guns, almost 180 guns, but he had little tactical skills. So on 13th November, the Britishers early in the morning attacked Deegh, and because Harnath Singh's troops were not properly deployed and they did not make the good use of the ground, they suffered heavy casualties and they ran away, leaving their guns. The contemporary reports suggest, written by the Britishers and Vakai Holkar, translated by Sir Jadunath Sarkar, they report that Harnath Singh lacked tactical skills and had placed most of his guns on flat ground. So when the British captured the hill surrounding that, they could roll down the hill and capture those guns. So naturally, Yeshwantrao Holkar was furious at the defeat. Now, in this, after this loss, the the infantry of Yeshwantrao Holkar ran. Some entered the Deegh fort and some ran away. But they lost a lot of their guns. Meanwhile, General Lake was following Yeshwantrao and was travelling very light and so could cover almost 6 miles in 24 hours, which was far beyond Holkar's expectation. As a result, on the morning of 17 November, General Lake's forces surprised Holkar's camp at Farrukhabad. And due to this sudden raid, Yeshwantrao Holkar lost half of his cavalry, the most valued component of his force, and he barely escaped that raid. But this was the turning point that forced Holkar onto the back foot. Meanwhile, after capturing the surrounding area of Deegh Fort, General Fraser, who was mortally wounded, he died in that. And Britishers did suffer good amount of casualty. But the surrounding area of fort was captured and they laid siege to the fort. Now the fort, all the troops were pushed inside it and the fort was encircled. And finally, the Deegh fort fell on 25th of December and the Holkar's army withdrew towards defeat. Bharatpur exposed the weaknesses of Yeshwantrao Holkar's fort, that they could not easily hold a fixed fortification against the British. They cannot take on the British on a pitched battle. His greatest advantage lay in mobile cavalry tactics and quick raids. Meanwhile, Raja Ranjit Singh, having sheltered Yeshwantrao Holkar, was now openly at war with the company. He thus faced an impending British siege at Bharatpur itself. Now, within the span of 6 weeks, Yeshwantrao Holkar's infantry had lost 2 significant battles, Deegh and earlier at Farrukhabad, and thereby losing much of their artillery, cavalry. The British, after being harassed for almost a year and marching more than 1,000 kilometers, finally secured the strategic initiative, while Yeshwantrao Holkar now increasingly is struggling to maintain a robust defense. The British, conversely, operated from a position of advantage with superior logistics and trained regulars. The fall of Deegh fort in December 1804 put the Raja of Bharatpur, Raja Ranjit Singh, under immense strain. He had never anticipated that breaking a treaty with British and helping Yeshwantrao Holkar would bring the war to his doorstep. With his fort at Deegh lost and Yeshwantrao Holkar's battered forces seeking refuge and resources at Bharatpur, the Raja was now drawn into open conflict against the company. Meanwhile, Britishers, having seen Yeshwantrao Holkar's troops relying on Bharatpur for shelter and supplies, General Lake decided that choking Ranjit Singh was essential to crippling Yeshwantrao Holkar. By early January 1805, General Lake marched towards Bharatpur, this time determined to trap Yeshwantrao Holkar's remaining infantry, artillery and cavalry under the walls. Now, Bharatpur's fort was solid. It had thick, high walls flanked by bastions, enclosed a vast town 8 miles in circumference, a wide and deep ditch filled with water that surrounded much of the fortress, which was posing severe obstacles to British siege tactics. Now, Raja Ranjit Singh's own garrison joined Yeshwantrao Holkar's defeated remaining force. Now, Yeshwantrao Holkar's cavalry was encamped outside the fort with an intent to harass British supply line. General Lake, pushing for a quick victory, surrounded the fort and launched attacks on 9th and 11th and 12th January 1805. But all these attempts failed, with Britishers suffering heavy casualties. The Britishers underestimated the fortified mud walls and the defenders' resilience. Now, despite the reinforcements the British army could get from all over the country, they could not enter the fort. Over 4 unsuccessful attempts were made, and the Britishers lost almost 3,200 men, including 103 officers. Now, by late February, General Lake recognized that repeated assaults have failed and he would not be able to make any. So what he did was he converted the siege into a blockade, positioning his troops to contain rather than storm the. In these four attacks that they launched, the British guns became unserviceable. They fired so many rounds. The ammunition stocks ran low. There was widespread sickness and exhaustion that afflicted the attacker. The defenders, for their part, repaired breaches at night and launched counterattacks on British logistics. So, when General Lakes converted the siege into a blockade just to contain the fort, Holkar's cavalry roamed freely in the countryside, striking at British detachments whenever possible. Now, facing mounting losses, plus the possibility he was anticipating, Raja Ranjit Singh, that Scindia now may come to rescue Holkar, he approached General Lake, offering to resume friendship with the British. He did not realize, perhaps he did not know how much damage his forces, combined forces, Yeshwant's and his forces, had done on British. Perhaps he did not know and thought that his losses were too much and he will not be able to pursue a defensive battle anymore. So he approached General Lakes for a friendship. Finally, a treaty was signed in April 1805. Ranjit Singh agreed to pay 20 lakh rupees in damages and surrendered the fort of Deegh until proving his loyalty. On 21st April 1805, after almost 4 months, the British withdrew from Bharatpur, ending a 3.5-month stalemate that had severely tested their force. Now, Yeshwant's position became precarious after Raja Ranjit Singh had signed a treaty with British. Daulat Rao Scindia did flirt with offering him support, but nothing concrete materialized, and so Yeshwantrao Holkar was without any ally. And by early 1805, Yeshwantrao Holkar's army was badly diminished after tough fights at Deegh and Bharatpur. But he still refused to surrender and even sought alliances with Sikh ruler Maharaja Ranjit Singh. Meanwhile, Britain, exhausted from Wellesley's costly wars, faced leadership changes and empty coffers that pushed both sides towards peace. Finally, in January 1806, both sides signed the Treaty of Rajgarh that allowed Yeshwantrao Holkar, one, to retain all his territories. He paid no punitive indemnities to Britishers and avoided subsidiary alliances, unlike other Maratha chiefs. Though the British claimed a grand triumph, in reality they had little appetite for further conflict. Yeshwantrao Holkar's mobile warfare and unyielding stance forced the company to negotiate with him on relatively equal terms, leaving a legacy of remarkable resilience against colonial power. Yeshwantrao Holkar I was a fiercely independent Maratha ruler who resisted British power without paying indemnities or ceding vast territory, a rare achievement compared to Tipu Sultan, Scindia and others. Known for his ruthless movements but also generous leadership, he waged mobile warfare that drained East India Company coffers, forced a parliamentary scrutiny that contributed to General Wellesley's recall and sacking of the chief of army, General Lakes. Despite limited resources, Yeshwantrao Holkar inflicted heavy losses on them, avoided any large-scale defeat, and signed a treaty that preserved his sovereignty. He therefore remained a rallying point for Indian soldiers and was the last major Maratha challenger before 1850. While his early death in 1811 ended that formidable threat to British, but his legacy endures as an audacious strategist who exposed the British vulnerabilities and upheld Indian resistance at a time when most others capitulated. Jai Hind!